Okay, so now we know HTML and CSS. And after a few exercises, we also saw that creating HTML pages with CSS styling is kind of fun. The problem is, it takes lots of work to create a good and professional looking website with just plain HTML and CSS. At some point, you may be wondering, when we write programs, we don't program everything from scratch. We use libraries that provide pre-created functions. Are there any libraries that can help us create nice-looking web pages? Well, the answer is yes. And today we'll introduce the most widely used web UI library, Bootstrap. Before we look at Bootstrap, let's first introduce the concept of responsive web design. The idea is that these days, there are actually more people browsing the web on their cell phones than using computers. So it's very important that a website looks good on both desktop computers and mobile devices. In the past, companies would actually set up two different websites, one for computers and one for cell phones. This approach has some serious issues. Two websites are obviously more expensive to maintain than one, and it's difficult to keep them in sync. People Googling your company will find two sites, which is confusing. And what if someone is using a tablet? Do you send the person to the PC website or the phone app website? So later, people came up with the idea of responsive web design, which is basically designing websites that can automatically adapt to different viewing environments. One of the pioneers of responsive design is a website of the newspaper Boston Globe. Let's take a look. So, as we can see, this is what the website looks like on a large desktop screen. Now, notice that it has a big title here and a menu, and menu is here on top, and also 3 columns. Now, if we shrink the window size a little bit, we first notice that some of those menu items disappear, and then if we shrink it further, we notice that instead of 3 columns, it becomes 2. And if we shrink it even further, we can see that all the menu items disappear. Of course, there's still a collectible button where we can access all the menus. And now, instead of 3 columns or 2 columns, the whole website becomes 1 column, which is much more suitable to view on a cell phone screen. So this is a good example of the so-called responsive web design. And this is of course great, but then you may be wondering, hey, it took me an hour to create a simple page layout. How can I ever create a complex layout like this and also make it responsive? Well, this is where web user interface libraries can help. These UI libraries are also commonly known as CSS frameworks, though most of them also involve some JavaScript. If you look at the linked survey, let's go there. So this is the 2021 survey of CSS frameworks, and if we click usage, you can see that by usage, Bootstrap is by far the most widely used CSS framework at 85%. The second one is 39%, and nothing else comes above even 40%, while Bootstrap is at 85%. There are many others that you can choose from. As you can see, there are many other options for CSS frameworks. But in this class, we'll cover Bootstrap because I think Bootstrap is a good choice as the first UI library to learn, not just because it's the most widely used, but also because it pioneered many concepts and techniques that are also used in other frameworks. If you know Bootstrap, it's quite easy to pick up any other frameworks if you want. Now, first, a little bit background about Bootstrap. It was originally developed by Twitter, and later it became an open source project that everybody can use and contribute. Its motto is responsive, mobile first, and it's been the most popular web UI framework for quite some time. The official website is at getbootstrap.com, and it's here. And notice that if you go to bootstrap.com, it's something completely different. So remember, the official website is getbootstrap.com. And also, I want to quickly talk about the version issue with Bootstrap. If you go to the website and if you click on Docs or Documentation, you can see that there's a drop-down list here that shows multiple versions of Bootstrap. The current version is 5.1, which is what we'll cover in this class. And if you want to look up, the documentation for other versions, you can use this drop-down list. The issue is that Bootstrap version 5 is relatively new. Lots of online resources like tutorials, examples, still use older versions like version 4. So even when you Google, for example, if you Google, let's say, Bootstrap form, and if you click on the result link, you can see that it actually takes you to version 4 of the Bootstrap documentation. So if you, it doesn't even have the latest version. You'll have to actually go to the official website and get the latest version. So this is something that you need to be careful, because I know lots of people use online code and examples and Google and all that. So make sure that you know which version of Bootstrap you are using, because if you take, for example, a Bootstrap 4 example and using Bootstrap 5, it may not work. Okay, so now let's see how we can add Bootstrap to a HTML page. And let's first create an HTML page. I'll say this one is called test HTML, and we'll say HTML5. Oops, HTML5, and it gives us a skeleton of HTML. Oops. Okay, so let's put something here. Let's say hello Bootstrap, and if we open it up in a browser, it looks like this. Okay, then how do we add Bootstrap to that web page? In Java, if we want to use a library, we say import, then package name. With a UI library, we just need to link to some style sheets and the JavaScript files. So for Bootstrap, we just need to add a style sheet, which go inside the head element, and then we just need to add a JavaScript code, and by convention, JavaScript scripts goes to the end of the body tag. So by doing that, we are now including Bootstrap in our code, and you can see that it automatically changes the fonts a little bit. Another way to use Bootstrap is to use the starter template. It has the whole HTML template page. You can just copy and paste, and this give you a whole page. And notice that it has two options for the JavaScript part of the code. You can link to one combined script, or you can link to separate files. You'll just need one of these two options. Here we are using the combined code called Bootstrap bundle. Okay, so now we have this. Then how do we actually use it? Well, let's do a simple example. The key thing to understand is that Bootstrap provides lots of pre-created styles and utilities in the form of CSS classes. So for example, let's say I want what do I want? Let's say I want a border to this Hello Bootstrap. So I would say class border, and this as a border to the paragraph element. And let's say I want also, what do I want? Let's say I want a little bit margin around the P paragraph element. So let's say I will say margin 3, and yeah, margin 3 probably too much. Let's do margin 2. Okay, so let's add a little bit padding, and let's add a little bit, like add a background. So let's say we do background light. Okay, so it's hard to see, but there is a background there. And if we do background secondary, or let's say background primary. What's primary background? Okay, so the primary color is blue, so background primary is blue background. Anyway, so you'll see how it works. So this Bootstrap library provides a number of those pre-created CSS classes, and if you add a border class to your element, it gives it a border. If you add a margin class to the element, it gives you some margin, and so on and so forth. So learning Bootstrap is by and large really about learning those pre-created CSS classes, kind of like when you learn a Java library, you'll learn the class names, the methods, and so on. So here it's really about learning those Bootstrap CSS classes. And knowing that, in this video we will discuss mostly 4 things: the layout, how to do layout in Bootstrap, and how to use some of the components, how to style content, specifically things like tables and forms, and how to use some utility classes like the margin classes, the padding classes, and background and border and stuff. And after that, we will briefly talk about how to use icon sets, which icons are things that we use quite often in web development, and these days there are very good free icon sets we can utilize, and we'll see how to use the one that comes with Bootstrap. Okay, so we will start with layout, and to lay out a page using Bootstrap, you first need to put the blocks you want to lay out inside the element with either the container CSS class or the container fluid CSS class. And by the way, I put a dot in front of the class name to indicate it's a CSS class. The difference between container and container fluid is that container fluid will make the container taking up the full width of the page, while container has a fixed width, and the fixed width is adjusted automatically based on the screen size. Whether to use container or container fluid, it's up to you. It kind of depends on whether your website will look good when it always takes up the full width of the page. I usually prefer using container. You can put the container or container fluid class on the body element or on a div element that you want to use as a container. I usually just put it on body, which looks like this. And now it looks something like this. So at this screen size, the container will take up this much of width, and on a smaller screen it will take more percentage wise. Okay, so now we have our container. Let's see how we do layout. So Bootstrap lets us lay out elements inside a container using a grid system. You can put the CSS class row on some block element, usually a div element, to create a row, and then each row has a grid of 12 columns. You can then use column classes to create blocks that take up certain number of columns. For example, if you use column 3, for example, the block will take up 3 columns on the grid. Let's see an example on how it works. So let's first create 3 blocks of equal width, and let's get rid of this, and we'll create a div which has a row class, and then we will create 3 blocks, and let's see. Okay, so now I have a row and 3 columns. Each column has a class call, and this will basically give us 3 equal width blocks like this. Now, suppose we want 3 blocks with different width. Suppose we want, for example, a bigger one that takes up half of the page width, and then 2 smaller ones that take up 1/4 of the page each. We know the total number of columns of the grid is 12. So if we want to do this, then the first one will take up 6 columns, and the other 2 will take up 3 each. Now we can do that by using a column 6 and then 2 column 3, and that gives us something that looks like this. Now, as you can see, last time when we tried to create layouts, we use the CSS property float and clear, and it's kind of difficult to create multi-column layouts. We have to float left and right and set width and margin and all that. And now it's a lot easier whether you want 2 columns, 3 columns, the proportions of each column is much easier to create using a grid system like this. Using a grid to create layout is already quite useful, and then Bootstrap takes it one step further to make it also responsive. Bootstrap can automatically detect screen sizes, as we saw earlier when we resize the browser screen. And by doing that, it lets you to specify how styling should change based on screen size. Bootstrap defines 6 device categories, also called responsive breakpoints in the documentation. So extra small roughly, keyword roughly, corresponds to phone in portrait position, and small roughly corresponds to phone in landscape position, and medium is roughly the size of a tablet screen, and the large, extra large, and the extra large are for desktop monitors. And notice that there's a shorthand for each device category except for extra small. For example, SM is for small, MD is for medium, and so on. Many Bootstrap classes have different variants for different device categories, and this allows us to say things like, I want certain style when the device screen is of certain size. So now let's see how we can use these device categories in the grid layout. There are 2 types of column classes we can use to specify how wide a block is. We can say column n, which is what we are doing here, and this basically is saying that the block should be n columns wide when the screen size is extra small or above. So there's also the all above part. And notice that there's no device shorthand here because extra small has no device shorthand. And now, as you can kind of tell, we can also add a device shorthand and say the block should be n columns wide when the screen size is of certain device or above. For example, here we are saying that the block should take up 6 columns when the screen size is medium or above. Now the real cool part is this. We can combine these classes together, and for example, this one says the block should take up 3 columns when the screen is large or extra large or above, and it should take up 4 columns when the screen is medium, and 12 columns when the screen is extra small or small. Or this one is between extra small and medium, so this covers extra small and small, this one covers medium, and this one covers large, and extra large and extra large. So how does this work? Excuse me. Suppose this is how we want our page looks like. 3 columns when the screen is pretty large, but when the screen becomes smaller, maybe we want this becomes 2 columns and this becomes a separate column, and maybe if it's even smaller, then it all becomes one column, kind of like how Boston Globe website works. So we can do something like this. We can say the first column should take up half of the screen width when the device is large or extra large, and when it's medium, it should also be, so we say medium or above, it should take up six columns or half of the width, and when it's less than that, it will take up the whole width, 12 columns. And this one, let's say it will be full width when the screen is very small, and if it's medium, it takes up half. If it's large, it takes up 3. And this one will say if it's large, it takes up 3. If it's anything else, it takes up 12. Okay, so let's look at, let's see how it looks like. Now, if it's large, can I make it? Okay, so if it's large, then half, and then 1/4, and then if it becomes medium, then this one is half, this one is half, and this one takes full width and becomes its own row. And if it's smaller than medium, now they all become one column or full width. So as you can see, we can now create some layouts, or in fact responsive layouts, kind of like Boston Globe, with really minimal efforts. All we need to do is just put some classes on our div blocks, and the Bootstrap library handles everything else. Okay. So now that we know how Bootstrap Grid works, let's see if we can use it in a more complex example. And again, suppose we want to create our own Boston Globe clone, which looks like this. Right? So let's say we want to create something like this. We will have a big title on top, and then a menu, and 3 columns, and on smaller screens, these 2 columns, it becomes 2 columns plus a 3rd column underneath, and on even smaller screens, we will have 1 column, and also the menu collapses into a collapsible button menu, or the so-called hamburger menu, I think it's called. And also instead of showing the big title, we'll show a icon instead. Okay, so let's say this is something that we want to create, and we will start with this. So this is a skeleton of the page we want to create. Right now it doesn't really have much style. It looks like this. So I have a header and a list for the menu, and then I have 3 big blocks, left, middle, and right. And each block I give it a color, so it's easier to tell which one we're looking at. So left is light green, and then light blue, light yellow, and so on. So we have green, blue, and yellow, and inside each block there are stories, and each story is a block of its own with a header and a paragraph. Okay, so let's say we have something like this and we want to turn it into something like this. The first thing is let's create the layout, which we know how to do, and we'll do class container, and then we will add a row block. This row block will contain all the other blocks. And then each column will have some classes of their own. So originally, what do we have? We have a wider column, another somewhat wide column, and this one is somewhat narrower. So if we distribute all this into among 12 columns, I guess this one would be 5, this one would be, let's say, 3, this one would be 4. Okay, so we'll say when the screen is large, this one will take up 5, this one will take up 3, and this one will take up 4. Okay, so we have the row, we have the container. Oh, I forgot to add the library itself. That's not good. So let's copy over the CSS, put it here, and then let's copy over the JavaScript and put it here. Okay, so now it should give us did I put them in the right? Ooh. Okay, so I do have Bootstrap and I do have the JavaScript, and why it's not doing anything? This is I think I copied the wrong. So that's the JavaScript, not the, yeah, it's this one. Okay, so this is the CSS. I copied the JavaScript and I thought it was the CSS. Okay, so now it works, and so column large should be 5, and the middle should be 3, not 5, and the next one should be 4. Okay. All right, so now we got the layout. A little bit debugging practice. And then after that, let's see what else do we want. Oh, we want the nav bar. So nav bar is one of the components provided by Bootstrap, and you can see Bootstrap provides lots of components, and we certainly do not have time to go over every single one of them. But the good news is that every one of them has very good documentation, examples, and so on. So most of the time, you just need to copy and paste code and make a few changes, and that's what we are going to do. We are going to use this thing called navbar, and we are going to copy over some code. For example, this is how the navbar looks like. It can have a menu can have drop down, menu items can be active, meaning that this indicates the current page is home, and the inactive ones has a slightly lighter color, and you can disable something, you can add a menu here, and so on. So what we'll do is we'll copy over this whole thing, and then put it here, and then we'll make some changes. For example, we do not need a drop-down list, so we'll get rid of the drop-down, and we'll get rid of the drop down, which starts, I think, from here to here. And we don't need the disabled link, so we get rid of this one, and we don't need the form, so we get rid of this one, and that leaves us with this button, and let's say this is my globe. And what else? We need 4 links. We'll get 2 more, and we'll put metro here, and sports here, business here, opinion here, and we can get rid of the old one. And notice that here you can put in actual links if it actually links to a different page, and we can get rid of the active and current page. Presumably we are on the home page, and the metro will take us to a different page. If we look at this, it will be something like this, which is great. Now we are in business, kind of. And so just like all other Bootstrap components, we use a whole bunch of Bootstrap CSS classes like navbar, navbar light, and so on and so forth. So most of these are kind of self-explanatory. For example, if you see navbar, it tells you that this component is going to be a navigation bar, and navbar expand large means that if the screen is larger or above, it will expand the full menu, and if it's less than large, it will collapse the menu. So if we do something like this, we can see that when it becomes less than large, it collapses into a hamburger button, and so that hamburger button is here, and when on large screen or above, this one is not shown, but if it's smaller, it collapses, and so on. And my globe is this part. This is called the navbar brand, which can have a link. If you click on it, it takes you to it. Here you can put a picture, image here, icon here, or text. And then you can see a bunch of classes like navbar nav, and which have navbar item, navbar link, and so on and so forth. So those, you can take a look at those and basically figure out what they mean. There are a few things I want to quickly mention. Yeah, we talked about the manual button and collects behavior. The data attributes. So if you look at the sample code, you can see it has a few attributes that start with data. Data dash BS stands for Bootstrap, data Bootstrap toggle, data Bootstrap target, and so on. So, excuse me. These attributes are not standard HTML attributes. These are not like ID, class, style, those standard HTML attributes. HTML5 allows users to define their own attributes, and these user-defined attributes start with data dash, and they are mostly used to add some additional data to an element, and this data later can be used by some JavaScript code. So note that these are user-defined attributes. And then there are these area attributes. You'll see there's area controls, area expanded, area label, and so on and so forth. So these are accessibility attributes that makes web content more accessible by people with disabilities. You can check out the linked website for more information on area attributes. We won't go over the details, but if you use like sample code from Bootstrap official documentation, most of the components come with area attributes that you can just keep. For forms and tables, I won't do any examples here because the Bootstrap documentation already has lots of good examples. For example, if you want forms, there's actually a section just for forms where it has examples that show you how to create this type of forms and various variations of forms. And similarly, if you want to style tables, which also happen quite often, check out the table documentation just by adding simple classes like table. You'll get nice looking tables like this, and you can get a striped table, table with different backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So go check out the documentation. In this video, I do want to show some Bootstrap utility classes like the margin class, the padding class, borders, and so on. You may be wondering why we need to use Bootstrap utility classes to do those things. Doing those in plain CSS is already quite simple. The answer is that Bootstrap utility classes are responsive, meaning that, for example, if you say margin 3, then 3 means different things under different screen sizes, and it automatically adjusts that margin, and that's a very useful feature. And in addition to being responsive, utility classes also give you color themes, and oftentimes it's just more convenient. So all in all, I highly recommend that you get yourself familiar with Bootstrap utility classes. So let's see what we do in our example. So let's see, in our example, we want some border, and in particular, we want a bottom border for our stories. So if we want to do that, then we go to utilities and then we go to borders, and we can see that there are different ways to add borders to using Bootstrap classes. If we want all borders, we can say border. If we just want top border, we say border top. If we want just border, if we just want the bottom border, we say border bottom, and so on. And we can also set border color. And what color does it have? I think it just have the regular default color. Okay, so let's try that. So if I want a border, and where do I put it? So let's say we put it here. Each story will have a border bottom. And what does it look like? I cannot even see it. How about we say border bottom, border secondary? So this is a story. How about border primary? Is it just I cannot see it on my screen, or it doesn't exist? Okay, so I think it's not doing anything. And oh, that's because I misspelled class. Okay, so now I have a border with a primary border color, which I don't really want. Okay, so this color is very, very light. And how about we do border secondary? Okay, so secondary color is what we want. So let me grab this and put it on the stories. Okay, so now we have our borders, and this is an example of using the border classes. As you can see, it's quite easy to use. You just specify what border you want, and you can also specify the color of the border. And let's also do a little bit spacing. And what spacing do we need? So okay, so maybe we want a little bit more margin for the stories so that they don't stay too close to the boundary. Yeah, a little bit margin, and maybe a little bit more margin between stories. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll add a little bit margin to stories, and where do we put them? So we'll put them between stories, and we'll say margin bottom and top. Okay, so let's put a little bit padding first. We'll do what do we do? We'll do a little. What if I have padding 3? That should add a little bit padding inside the stories. Okay, and yeah, padding 3 is probably a little bit too much, and let's do padding 2. And I also want a little bit spacing between stories, so let's also do margin bottom 2, something like this. yeah, it looks better, I think. Yeah, so now there are more spacing between stories if you compare that to these ones. So just to save some time, I'm not going to do all of them, just these two. The more important thing is to understand what does P2 and B2 mean. And that is in the spacing part. So a class that starts with M stands for margin. It will set margin, and P stands for padding, of course. And now we know that margin is a space around element, and padding is a spacing inside the element. And then if we just say M and P, it will give us spacing on all four sides. However, if we just want spacing on top or at bottom, left and right, we can say add T and B, T for top, B for bottom. Left, however, is not L. It used to be L, but for some reason Bootstrap 5 changed L to S, start, which is left, and N, E for right or end, and X and Y for both left and right together. So if we want spacing like in horizontal direction, we say X, vertical direction, we say Y. And then there are a number of 0 to 5 levels, and if we say 2, it will set a little bit spacing, and like I said, it's responsive, meaning that depending on the screen size, to automatically adjust spacing, and the 5 will give you more spacing, and so on. So if you combine this by specifying property and then size and then size, it will give you classes like P2 and B2 and so on, which you can use to adjust spacing. Now, what about colors? Right? We have already seen things like doing border color and doing navbar color and background color like this. Right? So at this point, you probably notice that Bootstrap doesn't define colors like red, green, or blue. Instead, it defines colors as primary color, secondary color, success color, danger color, and so on. So if you go to colors, you can see that it defines primary color, secondary color, success color, danger color, warning color, and so on. And the default color theme is primary color being blue, secondary color being yellow, success color being green, and so on and so forth. So why doing things like this, right? And the answer is these colors constitute a so-called color theme, and by sticking to these theme colors, you ensure that your website has a consistent look, and even better, you can easily change the whole look of a website by simply applying a different color theme. For example, you can find quite a few free Bootstrap themes at this website, bootswatch.com. And to change to a different color theme, all you need to do is replacing the default Bootstrap CSS with the CSS of the selected theme. For example, if you want to do a dark theme, you can use, for example, darkly and or sidewalk. And let's quickly try that. The Bootstrap is available. Bootwatch is available here, and we can go here and then let's do darkly or cyborg. I cannot find either one. Okay, okay, darkly is here. Let's do darkly, and so in order to do darkly, we just need this one, the Bootstrap CSS, and we use it to replace the original one, and so we put it here, and we delete this one. Yeah, and now our page looks like this. Okay, so since the stories do not use theme colors, they don't change, but the rest changed. Anyway, this is the nice thing about color theme is by changing just one CSS, you'll get something completely different, and that's quite nice. There's one more utility I want to mention, display, and this one is particularly useful when you want to hide something or show something based on screen sizes. So the documentation is here, and the display utilities start with D, and then the values could be none, meaning that it does not display, or it can display as inline element, inline block element, and all the rest. And then you can add a breakpoint into the mix, and this allows you to say if it's small, I do not want to display it, and by setting it to none. If it's large, I want to display it, and so on. So this allows us to do something like this. So my glow, for example, will be displayed when the screen is large or very large, and we will hide it when the screen is smaller. So yeah, so we can do something like this. We'll say this one will do D none, meaning that do not display it, and then we can also say D large, and H1 is a block element, so we'll say D large block, and this way, if we shrink, yeah, it disappears, right? It disappears. This one, by the way, is a Navbar brand, which is not the big title. And on smaller screens, it displays, it disappears, and on larger ones, it displays. So these are the display utility classes. Like I said, very useful if you want to hide something or show something depending on screen sizes. And what else? Yeah, so the last thing I want to show is the usage of icon sets. For example, oftentimes you want to use an icon like this, right? And also, instead of just borrowing menu items, you may want to also add icons next to the text and so on. So these days, there are many good icon sets online, and the Bootstrap has its own icon sets, and if you want to use the so-called material design for your website, you can use the material icons, and then there's the font awesome icons, which is very, very popular, though it's not completely free as the other ones. in our example, I want to quickly show you how to use icons and icon settings, actually to use them as special fonts. So let's go to first here, and we are going to use Bootstrap icons, and to install it or to include it in your web page, there are different ways to do it. You can download a copy and host it on your own website. If you do front-end SPA development, you can install it using npm. In our case, we are going to use the CDN, the Content Delivery Network hosted Bootstrap icons, and just need to copy this and put it in here. And notice that it really just a CSS file style sheet, just include it, and now you have access to those icons. Now for our example, let's say we want to use a globe icon, and let's search for it. So Bootstrap icons have lots of icons, and the easy way to look for things is to search for it. So if I search globe, I have two, either one I guess will do. If you click on it, it will give you a few different ways you can include into your web page, and again, you can download it as a SVG image. You can, include the SVG image directly in your HTML. The one that I like most and that I would recommend for common usage is include the icon as a so-called icon font, basically a special type of font or text. And so here we can replace this one with that. Instead of saying my globe, we'll say the globe icon, and you can see it's right here. And now this one, we want to hide it until the screen is small, so we can do something like that. We can say what do I say? So we can say D inline and D medium now. So meaning that medium or above it's hidden, and anything below that it will be displayed as inline, which is because I is an inline element. And so gone, and if we shrink, oh, it comes out later than medium. What else? Maybe it should be large. Yeah, something like that. And the nice thing about including it as a special font instead of image is that you can actually just style it as if it's text. So for example, if I want it to be larger, I can simply say style font size 2em, and this will, 2em maybe too much, 1.5 em, and this will make it larger. So just regular styling for text would apply to these icons. Okay, so yeah, this is it for this video. It's a very quick introduction to how to use the Bootstrap library and how to use some icon sets. And that is it. And as you can see, once you know how to use a library, a UI library, it's pretty easy to use and really saving you tons of time when you want to create a nice looking, professional looking website quickly. Okay, so that is really it. See you in the next video.